Batman is poor. His mother is still alive, and he is more than happy to mutilate dozens of people, both with a bat axe formed from the crest on his chest and by submerging them in hydrochloric acid. He also shoots Alfred Pennyworth in the face with a shotgun, firing bat shrapnel. He's also best friends with the Penguin, Riddler, and Killer Croc and plays poker with them on Saturdays. Superman is a communist yet again, but unfortunately not a red sun, because the Kents weren't around to raise him right. The S means worker, and everyone on Krypton was forced to wear their little yellow stars, where sunburst scientists and the League of Middle Management... No, I wish I was joking. And on Earth, he fights for the rights of the worker, immigrant workers particularly, against capitalism, as the corpos are run by Brainiac. Lois Lane is one of the corpos' agents and develops a massive fetish for Superman's smell, which happens to be alcohol. He's also Iron Man and fights helicopter tanks. Lastly, Wonder Woman rides a dead horse instead of beating it. She was raised in Hell, where she spent her days learning dark magic, talking to monsters, and binge-reading Berserk. Thus, she's now fighting demons with Guts' sword, possibly in order to protect the first man she ever saw, which she instinctively claimed as property from the local tentacle monster. And considering her lasso is now a pink BDSM rope that punishes based on the weight of one's sins, and or conceivably fetishes, I suspect he's in for a stormy relationship. And that has been a quick summary of the first issues of the absolute version of these new heroes. I suspect I'm probably a little bit late to the bandwagon here, as I think these comics released like a month or so ago, if not two, but I only recently got a hold of them. Norway and all. And Jesus. I had to talk about them, even if I am far too late, because we are no longer subverting expectations. Rather, the expectation is now subversion, as quite literally everything you would expect from these characters have been flipped 180 degrees on their heads. Why? Do you really need to ask? In this day and age? Well, the people who this is aimed at can explain that more swiftly than I. For example, we have a review here stating that now that Bruce Wayne is a working-class citizen, the senseless crime against him hits harder, despite, of course, in this story, only one of his parents being murdered. So, having one of your parents murdered is, worse than having both of them killed in an equally senseless crime? Just because of the class of the victims involved? What on God's good earth is this extreme Marxist nonsense? For some mysterious reason, I suspect that Bruce Wayne would happily give away all of his wealth if it would bring one of his parents back to life. But because he's rich in the originals, he is somehow less worthy of sympathy. As a child with his parents murdered, he is less worthy of sympathy because his parents had money. Holy shit. These are very, very bad people, in case you were missing that particular point. And this then continues out throughout the comic as well, as it has been a common critique of the Batman amongst those with far left-wing brain rot, that he is simply just a rich kid with issues beating up the poor of Gotham City. And by the poor, we mean the Penguin, Two-Face, Clayface, the Joker, you know, the criminally insane, and general criminals, murderers, rapists, thieves, etc. You know, the average man. Again, I somewhat disagree with this classification. The criminally insane are not quite synonymous with the working class, but details. As Batman's enemies in Absolute Batman are not those people. Instead, they are the party animals, whom, in case their name is not enough of a dead giveaway, as a reference to Bruce Wayne's, protective persona of a party kid playboy billionaire to make sure that nobody suspects that he is actually Batman, also wears primarily suits and ball gowns. To hammer home the point this time, the bad guys are the rich. Indeed, Joker himself is now basically Bruce Wayne, a billionaire, and all of the bad guys from previous iterations of Batman, that working class, well, They are here now, alongside the Batman as his friends. Killer Croc, the Penguin, another beautiful example of the working class, most assuredly so, and Riddler. If you still haven't gotten the point, by the way, the Batman now is a construction worker, and most of his weapons and equipment are construction tools, like chemicals, for example, or using rebar in his wings, or simply carrying around an enormous slab of sharpened metal on his chest as his new emblem, the Bat Brick, which he can attach a stick to create the Brick Axe, which he can now use, happily so, to dismember the bad guys because, well, they're not the poor anymore, you see. This guy wears a suit, and therefore cutting his hand off with the Brick Axe is entirely morally justifiable, whereas the previous iterations of Batman using significantly less violence to subdue criminals was a bad guy because of his social class. This comic has been written by a 12-year-old that has been beaten every single solitary day of his life with Das Kapital. And I really mean it when I say significantly less violence. The absolute Batman will stab his opponents, he will slash them with axes, he will dunk them in hydrochloric acid, and do pretty much whatever it takes to do as much damage to them as imaginable. And I love this part of the comic, by the way. When Alfred Pennyworth, who's now an MI6 agent, we'll get to that in a second, he's looking at Batman's brilliant knife work and is going, wow, he's doing so well. It's all non-lethal. Yeah, sure, he just stabbed two enormous lengthy knives into this guy's shoulders, but he's fine. Don't worry about it. Batman is missing the arteries by just so much, you see. He's just that good. 2 panels later, he's chopping a dude's hand off with an axe. How did we miss that artery, I wonder? This is like the extreme version of how you occasionally see old-school Batman hit someone with his car and just be assured that, oh no, they were fine. As old-school Batman as well occasionally carries out blatantly lethal actions against his opponents, but it's kind of excused because, you know, it's a comic. Well, absolute Batman takes that to the ridiculous limit as well, as Batman steals Alfred's shotgun and then shoots him in the face with it point-blank range. And it's a non-lethal shotgun. He modified it to be non-lethal. How did he modify it? By making it fire bat shrapnel the size of a human thumb. I don't know how to tell you this, but just a regular 12 gauge would have been significantly less lethal than that. I mean, look at those things. They're probably like 3-4 times the mass of buckshot. You know, that shotgun is not non-lethal, and Alfred Pennyworth is very, very, very dead. Oh, and yes, Alfred Pennyworth is an MI6 agent in this, and it's heavily implied that he's been committing countless war crimes at the command of the British government. Of course. Hey, at least some things stay the same, right? Gordon is in this, and he's even white, with glasses, my god. Granted, it is heavily implied that he was banging Martha Wayne, and Barbara Gordon is still black. Somehow, so I guess he's really been getting around in those old days, but oh well. At least it's an element of similarity, and at this point I will grab onto any straw offered me, as we move on to Absolute Superman, which makes Absolute Batman look subtle by comparison. I'm not kidding. The S on Superman's chest, does it stand for hope? No, it stands for worker. As Krypton, of course, is another extraordinarily class-based society, with the ruling class are the rich, the affluent, the scientists, and the workers are kept in check by the League of Middle Management. Help me, please. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, how on God's good earth did Clark Kent actually make it to Earth, or, well, Jor-El, there is no sign of any sort of a Clark Kent here whatsoever, because after all, if his parents were, well, not amongst the elites, not amongst the scientists, how did they make him a goddamn spaceship to send him to a planet Earth, God only knows how far away? Well, you see, in this reality, apparently Krypton never actually put any effort whatsoever into exploring space. No. They didn't have spacefaring technology at all, practically. They were too busy plundering their own planet, which would of course eventually lead to a natural disaster, as they used too many of their world's resources too greedily. They simply just, didn't listen to the environmentalists. Luckily for Superman, his parents were amongst the latter group. And whereas Krypton had not really developed any means to explore space, his mother had built a spaceship at the age of 12. Because of course she had. And not just a spaceship either, mind you, an intelligent suit of armor that could protect Kal-El, could empower him, could advise him, could allow him to fly and do all kinds of Superman-y stuff. Wow, at the age of 12. Impressive. What did the dad do? Oh, he dug up some minerals. Oh, well. Wonderful. Also, it amuses me to no end that Krypton had Labrador retrievers. I mean, hey, I suppose it's no more silly than them having people that just look like human beings, so shrug. Anyways, Superman gets sent to Earth, where he immediately begins fighting for the downtrodden and the oppressed, the immigrant workers. Natürlich. But the evil corporations are not happy with merely getting him to do all of their work for them for basically free. So they try to capture Superman, with Agent Lois Lane stepping in and managing to slap a pair of handcuffs on him. Man, that super spacesuit of yours really should have stopped her before she got that close, but oh, details. He then rushes off, beats up a bunch of bad guys, saves a bunch of people, and Lois Lane falls deeply, madly in love with his scent, his masculine musk, which she describes as an oak barrel full of burgundy stored for 1,000 years in a musty basement. Oh, Jesus Christ. Very well, then. And may I also just add at the end that she felt that little detail was important enough to write about in her official report. There's a very large red flag on her account after all of that. Oh my god. And of course, the evil corporation is really just incredibly, ridiculously over-the-top evil. They don't merely exploit migrant workers, oh no, they are run by literally Brainiac, and they shoot random civvies for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Subtlety. What even is that anymore? But hey, I do suppose you're dealing with a rather dim-witted target audience, but they did not miss out on the point here, and I mean, how could they? Only way you could have made this more obvious was if you'd wrapped issue 1 of Batman Absolute around a jackhammer, and then used it to throat-fuck the journalist with. My god, and of course, this raises a whole lot of other questions as well. If Superman is now solely, singularly helping the working class, what does that mean for him helping anybody else? Does he have morals for helping the rest of humanity? Or is he simply now going to lead the proletariat revolution? The worst part is they already did this storyline, but far better in Red Sun. At least that had a degree of subtlety to it and a bit of a twist at the end, which somehow I doubt this one's going to have. Oh well. Finally, we arrive at Absolute Wonder Woman, by far the best of the three. Quite simply because it doesn't obsess itself with actual, quite literal communism. Anywho, Absolute Wonder Woman begins with a demon invasion of California, and unfortunately that's not where it also ends. No, as Absolute Wonder Woman sweeps on in on a dead horse and starts decapitating flying demons. Okay, I gotta admit, as much as I loathe the other two entries in this series, that is pretty cool. As massive of an inversion as it is, I can't help but enjoy a muscled woman wielding a buster sword slicing demons to ribbons. I got a weak spot for it. But that is not where our Amazon's history begins. In fact, the entire word and term Amazon is banned, as apparently the Amazons did something mean to the gods, and the gods decided to banish and imprison all of the Amazons, except for Diana, that is, as they looked deep into her little baby blue eyes and saw the words main character written in them. Thus, obviously, they couldn't simply just dump her in with all of the other Amazons. Instead, they sent her to hell, and even handed her over to Circe, who... Circe? I don't even know. Who didn't really care all much about the baby to begin with. You know, living your life on a tiny desolate island, being banished forever to hell, will kind of do that to your, well, sense of compassion. Anywho, a snake then arrives to reproduce the opening scene in Hercules, where Diana grabs the serpent and... literally yeets it into the sun, presumably. Okay, I am a massive fan of Hercules, so I will take that as a tribute, frankly. It turns out that Diana actually has a remarkable ability to talk to hellish creatures and befriend them. Rightio then. Having swiftly befriended the majority of the hostile local fauna, she spent her days with her new mother, learning the dark arts of magic and sorcery, learning how to wield the weapons of hell and beating up demons. Honestly, it sounds like the best upbringing of any of the three characters so far, until one day, a man arrives on the shore and she instantly decides, this is my property now. And this man is then eventually returned to Earth, somehow, it's not really mentioned, and Diana decides to follow, because, of course, property now must follow. And she does so just in time to intervene as hell invades California. Unfortunately. She swiftly enough defeats the initial wave of hostile creatures, and then begins liaisoning with local military commanders, whom she begins, lecturing on the military-industrial complex. I don't know exactly how Diana, raised in hell, knows what the military-industrial complex is, or that it's worthy of critique, but I suppose we needed to force in at least one left-wingism in this story as well, as, beyond this, it is mercifully free of it. Diana isn't doing this for the workers, and she's not fighting against the elites. She's doing this because she wants to save people. And because she wants to get into Steve's pants. Heroism and holiness. Relatable qualities if ever there were any. Jesus, I can't believe that Wonder Woman is by far the least ideologically possessed out of these three, and yet it's absolutely true, as the Absolute comics are absolute inversions of the characters in question, with all of the obvious inherent issues that comes with them, the moral questions. Like, for example, okay, Bruce Wayne is locked in a room so he doesn't actually see his father die. He doesn't see the gun kill his father. He only hears the bang bang. So he isn't as traumatized by the gun as the other Bruce Wayne. If anything, he should be more traumatized by the bats being buried in a screeching, scrawling mass of them. And yet he's here not only fine with using a gun, suggesting again that he isn't actually quite as traumatized, and yet he doesn't actually use a gun to defeat the party animals. Why not? He's already chopping off limbs with a goddamn battle axe. Is it really that much more of a step to use his non-lethal bat shrapnel shotgun on them? He's already blown them up with a pre-prepared detonation on the layers of concrete, which would no doubt have sent rather hazardous shards of aforementioned concrete, not to mention the arming iron inside of it, hurled out of it at a very high velocity, probably killing more than a few of the party animals in the explosion. See, for all of the unreasoning hatred of the old-school superheroes, the fact is that these old-school characters were actually quite complex. I've talked about this in previous videos, but they have reasons and rationales for doing what they are doing both in and outside of the story. Take, for example, Batman's aversions to gun. Well, firstly, this is because he was himself traumatized from seeing his parents murdered by a gun. Duh, makes sense. But secondly, it also has an out-of-story reason, namely that he needs to be a heroic character. He can't simply take the easiest way out, which would absolutely be to cock a Colt 45 and execute a bitch. No, he's got to be better than that. He doesn't kill the Joker because he's trying to save the Joker. Even Superman, who's often derisively referred to simply as the Boy Scout, actually has a rather complex reason for doing what he's doing. After all, he is, by all reasonable measures and metrics, a god, and yet he spends the majority of his time attempting and pretending to be a human being in the guise of Clark Kent. But Superman is a persona that he applies to himself just to save people, whereas the real character obviously is Clark. As would I heartily argue, the real character is obviously Bruce as well, and have indeed heartily argued in the past. And when you start deconstructing these characters and adding in a hefty ladle of propaganda, the likes of which I don't think I have ever seen. Holy shit. I mean, the S means worker. Batman himself is a construction worker who only uses construction gear as weaponry. He's now middle class, fighting against the rich elites. Wow. Criminy crickets, they wouldn't have gotten away with something this blatant even 10 years ago, and yet here they are, not only doing it, but apparently succeeding. Jesus. And I sort of kind of see why, because at the very least the art is very, very good. If anything, the Wonder Woman comic, which is the one I like the most, has the worst art quality, as you can very clearly tell that they've tried to take a look at Diana of Themyscira and go to themselves, how do we make her look just a little bit uncanny valley? As when you compare her to, say, for example, the Justice League equivalent, yeah, something is definitely up, and it's not just the new red brands. But still, the art is majoritively good, and they are very action-focused comics. They have also, of course, received rave reviews for obvious reasons that I've already demonstrated, so gosh darn it. I guess this is how they should have done Caped Crusader to get away with its nonsense. Add in just enough subversion to the point where your average normie might not detect it, whilst not going fully overboard. I mean, I would have thought this was going fully overboard, but apparently my definition of overboard is woefully lacking. Regardless, it was good for a couple of laughs, and I'm done complaining now. You have my permission to return to your daily lives. Have a good day.